Mabel and Sadie, I have so much to say to you. Here's what I'm going to connect together in this Nechemta, and it's not even going to be long. The world water crisis, global warming, Moses hitting the rock, the Israelites complaining for water and food, the fiery snakes, Miriam's death, faith and forgiveness, procrastination, Juneteenth, which is today, and how all of this has to do with, wait for it, critical race theory. Check it out, check it out. All right, so we all know that Moses hits the rock and can't enter the promised land. And Sadie, so insightful of you to see that both Moses and God were taking the situation personally rather than understanding that it had nothing to do with them. Moses wasn't lacking faith in God, he was just angry. And he was angry because the people keep complaining over and over and over again, but the people's complaints weren't really about Moses, they were just thirsty and fed up and hungry. And of course, they're all out of water because, as you said, Abel, Miriam died, and her magical well dried up. I always feel when I read this portion that if everyone just had a little more context, if everyone could just step back and see clearly the history that led to the moment, they would be filled with compassion and understanding. They wouldn't get angry, they wouldn't fight, they would work together to solve problems. Let me say more about what I mean. Moses' sister just died right before he hit the rock. That is a major death for him. Miriam was the one who made it possible for him to be born, actually. As the Midrash teaches that she went to her parents and convinced them to have another child despite Pharaoh's decree that all baby boys would be killed. And then when Moses' mother, Yocheved, had to put Moses in a basket on the Nile, abandoning him to what probably seemed like certain death, Miriam followed that basket until it reached Pharaoh's daughter, and in that moment convinced Pharaoh's daughter to take on Yocheved as Moses' nursemaid, keeping Moses with his own mother. It was Miriam who buoyed the people's spirits with music and dancing after they crossed the sea, and who sustained them with water day after day after day throughout their journey. And when she dies, it makes sense that things fall apart. The people are grieving the prophet who lived in their midst, and they're anxious that they're never going to have water again. And Moses is in an even deeper grief at losing his sister, who'd kept him safe all this time. So of course he gets angry and hits the rock. And if we widen the lens just a little more, we see that the Israelites, who have been complaining and lacking fortitude and courage and grit through the wilderness, making them very easy to criticize, are a traumatized people. We often read the wilderness story as if it's separate from the slavery story. These are people who grew up enslaved, who carry the direct trauma of their lives before the Exodus, who've never had a moment to heal, to process what happened, to account for what it did to them, and who are now facing ever new challenges and stresses and fears and unknowns in a traumatized state. Of course they complain. Of course they keep talking about their experience in Egypt. They're being treated as if it never happened. It's impossible for their society to move forward without a full acknowledgement of its history. And now you can see how I got from the Parsha to critical race theory. Today is Juneteenth, for the first time, a federal holiday. Juneteenth is the anniversary of the day when Black people in Galveston, Texas, received news in 1865 that they were free, though they probably already knew that slavery had ended. Right now, there is a right-wing assault on critical race theory, which is really just, critical race theory, that phrase, is really just telling the truth of the history of this country. That's what it is. Fox News has criticized critical race theory 1,300 times since March. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, the state where Juneteenth became a holiday, has signed a bill banning critical race theory from public schools. More than 20 states have taken up similar legislation. And critical race theory is just the idea that if we don't talk about the history of racism in America, starting with the year 1619, when the first slave ships landed on our shores, and by the way, Nicole Hannah-Jones, an investigative journalist, created the 1619 Project in the New York Times, A project that merely told the history of slavery in the United States 400 years since it started, was recently denied tenure at UNC for her work on the project. There is a concerted effort, an effort that is succeeding, at concealing American history from American children, at convincing the American public that truth-telling about racism is racism and bad for children, at censoring our own history from our people, while also in these same states passing legislation that makes it much more difficult for people to vote, especially people of color. What is going on? Sadie, you talked about your own procrastination when you feel overwhelmed and feel down on yourself. This is something that everyone can relate to. We all put things off. We all avoid things when they make us feel bad about ourselves or when we find ourselves overwhelmed. As a country, we are procrastinating about two very important things simultaneously: facing the history of slavery and facing the consequences of our carbon emissions. Coming back to you, David. White people have been procrastinating for about 150 years since the end of the Civil War in facing our history and ourselves. The history of slavery makes us feel bad about ourselves. So of course we want to avoid it and deny it and pretend it never happened. But as we know, procrastination just makes things worse. Because we've never dealt with it, slavery became convict leasing and lynching and Jim Crow and redlining and police brutality and mass incarceration and on and on and on and on. It's like the spiral downward that you were talking about, Sadie. Same with the global water crisis and climate change. We've known about it. We've known about our environmental impacts at least since the writings of Rachel Carson 50 years ago. But we are overwhelmed. We feel terrible about ourselves, and we feel terrible about the world that we're leaving to you. We doubt our ability to reverse what we've done. We doubt ourselves, so we avoid it. We deny it. We pretend it's not happening. But that just makes it worse, day by day by day. Sadie, you saw something brilliant in this portion. You saw that Moses' reaction to the fiery snakes, his choice to intercede on behalf of the people in the second episode of them complaining, was a turning point. As he recovered from the death of his siblings, he was able to take a different posture, to step back and see with compassion and understanding. He was able to forgive the Israelites despite all the headaches they caused him. And he was able to have faith in them despite all of their limitations. You said this: forgiving someone is essentially having faith in them or what they could become. We procrastinate because we're ashamed. We feel that our mistakes and our wrongdoings are unforgivable. We feel incapable of change. We lack faith in ourselves and in what we could become. What we need to do to end our procrastination about slavery and climate change is simply to believe in what we can become. That will give us the courage to tell the truth, to be accountable for what we did wrong, and to seek forgiveness. When we face our own history, including our mistakes, our wrongdoings, our shortcomings, when we own what we did and what we failed to do, when we believe in ourselves enough to know that we don't have to be defined by the worst thing we've ever done, it becomes possible to forgive ourselves and to be forgiven. It's so frightening in anticipation. But when we have the courage and the faith to tell the truth, it ends up being a relief. We are unburdened. We no longer need to spend all that energy hiding, avoiding, and suppressing our own history and reality. This truth-telling, this accountability, this ownership of what we've done and failed to do, this is what earns us forgiveness. This is what our country so desperately needs so that we can solve our two biggest problems: systemic racism and environmental devastation. What we have to do is the process of teshuvah. What we have to do is walk in the steps of Miriam and Moses, as you, Mabel, and Sadie showed us right here in the Torah, right here in the wilderness. May we have the courage to dig and find that free-flowing well of water, of truth, of mercy, faith, of forgiveness, just beneath the surface. Shabbat, Juneteenth, Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.